Hey, what's up, guys? Hello, Football Talk here. Back with the last one of this divisional draft breakdown videos. Over this last month, we've talked about every single pick from every single team. And now let's finish up strong with the AFC West. Make sure to check out all the other videos as well when you have time. But today we'll focus on the Broncos, Chiefs, Raiders, and Chargers. And one final time here, how do we do these things? We'll go through the four teams alphabetically, quickly run through all the picks that they made, then discuss my evaluations of these players and how I think they will fit with the new team, and then talk about the draft class as a whole, before at the end of the video, we're going to compare the draft classes of these four teams against each other, give you my personal rankings. Make sure to check out my social media channels, linked down below in the description, if you're interested in my type of content, and there's also a link to my page, hellofootballtalk.com. But let's now kick this thing off with the Denver Broncos, who went first round, 9th overall, Patrick Surtain, the cornerback out of Alabama. Second round, 35th overall, Javonte Williams, the running back out of North Carolina. Then two third-round picks, 98th overall, Quinn Miners, the interior offensive lineman out of Wisconsin-Whitewater. And 105th overall, Baron Browning, the linebacker out of Ohio State. Then two fifth-round picks, 152nd overall, Caden Stearns, the safety out of Texas. And another safety, 164th overall, Jamar Johnson out of Indiana. 6th round, 219th overall, Seth Williams, the wide receiver out of Auburn. And then three more picks in the 7th round, 237th overall, Kerry Vincent Jr., the cornerback out of LSU. 239th overall, Jonathan Cooper, the edge rusher out of Ohio State. And 253rd overall, Marquis Spencer, the edge/interior defensive lineman out of Mississippi State. So with Patrick Surtain here at the top, I didn't look at the cornerback position as a weakness necessarily for the Broncos, especially just bringing in Kyle Fuller from Chicago, who was an all-pro corner for Vic Fangio the last time they were together. You still have Bryce Callahan as well, who played really well for you when he was available. I think missed like 6 weeks last season. To go with a couple of young guys. But the way I look at this now, with this trio of cornerbacks that they'll have out there starting, Surtain is going to be your boundary on the ball type of corner who's going to challenge receivers at the line. Kyle Fuller is more of your field side off corner who can attack routes and zone coverage. And then you can move Bryce Callahan back into the slot. But he was also a Pro Bowl level player almost for the Chicago Bears when he was there with Fangio. So that way the whole thing makes sense because now you have everybody in their appropriate roles. I don't think he has the elite physical tools of somebody like Caleb Farley, who was my CB1, or maybe even J.C. Horn from South Carolina, who went a pick earlier. But Surtain by far was the most technically sound corner in this draft. The way he can challenge receivers at the line, different press techniques, fake jams to force receivers to commit to their releases, and all those kind of things. Has that big frame and the strength to really push guys into the boundary. And that also shows up in the run game, his willingness to get off blocks and get involved, bring down the ball carrier. I think the two questions with him, I'm not sure if I see that true makeup speed to where he can allow some vertical separation to some of the true speedsters in this league and still catch up to them. And he wasn't challenged a lot actually at Alabama. So when the ball is up in the air and he's kind of running with his guy with his back towards the quarterback, he doesn't always find the ball in the air. But in general, he's really feisty at getting the ball out there when he sees it arrive. He challenges every single route, dictates the stems of those, takes away the space towards the sideline on those vertical routes, and puts his body in between that. So there's a lot of things to like, and I think it's going to be a really good scheme fit here. Certainly was a bit surprising, because you could have easily seen them go with a quarterback here, or I thought they might actually trade back and select a linebacker later. But they identified this as really completing that group of cornerbacks, so I can't hate on it too much, because now you have three legitimate cover corners and an excellent pass rush to go along with that. So that Denver defense could really be taking a jump again this upcoming season. And then they come back in the 2nd round, definitely also a little bit surprising. Moved up 5 spots with the Atlanta Falcons in exchange for a 3rd round pick, I believe, to select UNC running back Javonte Williams. And it's not the player that was surprising, because he was my number 3 running back. Just when you look at this backfield, with Melvin Gordon being really the guy that they seemingly banked on, as they've let Philip Lindsay walk in free agency basically. They still have Royce Freeman, who was a 3rd round pick for them back in 2018, I believe. Also brought in Mike Boone in free agency, who's going to be returning kicks for them to some degree, and be out there maybe on some passing downs. But Javonte Williams, now you bring him in there. This backfield is loaded all of a sudden because Gordon's a solid back, has certainly lost some of that juice. But Williams, to me, like I said, he was my RB3, but he was closer to 2 than 4, like solidly cemented in that position. Just the physicality that he brings to the table, that contact balance, getting to the second level and just churning out yards through contact. Did run primarily zones, so there's a bit of scheme dependence, and the Broncos do primarily run inside zone. To go with this power play with a couple of pullers out in front, which at North Carolina was really the other second scheme that they were using with some RPO elements off it. And Williams may not have that burst necessarily to threaten to the outside, or then that breakaway speed at the second level. But what I really appreciate about him is that ability to string moves together as he gets into the open field, where he's making a man miss, then already has his foot planted in the ground to spin off the second guy, and then lowers his shoulder and just drives through the last man, for example. Like, he's really good at pairing those things up and not really losing a step to where you see him actually think out there. So very natural in that regard. And then in the pass game, certainly delivers a thump at first contact. In pass pro as he's taking on guys. And as a receiver, very natural hands. The ability to catch the ball on the move and not really have to slow down. Getting involved in the screen game, on swings and stuff like that. Not a ton of stuff down the field, but I don't really see any issues in that regard. So I think a very complete back. Maybe doesn't have that breakaway speed like I already talked about, which they don't necessarily have with Melvin Gordon either. So that element may be missing. But in terms of a two-headed backfield, and I think Williams will definitely get the majority of touches, but two physical runners on the inside that can really pound defenses, and then you boot off that, get the play action game going. Like, I see the plan behind it. I was just surprised that he actually spent 2 picks really to get Javonte Williams here when they already looked fine in the backfield. But then they come back in the 3rd round and they get Quinn Miners, my number 9 interior offensive lineman, coming from Division III Wisconsin Whitewater. And he was really the star of the Senior Bowl, with his belly hanging out, the whole story behind him, working out in the woods. Like, he was getting a little overhyped by NFL Network and ESPN and all those things, as they were following him around constantly. But when he was out there, pancaking guys, creating big lanes in the middle in the run game. And what I really liked was seeing him play center, because he started at left guard these last 3 years. His school actually didn't have a 2020 season, but he was dominant against the competition he was up against on those combo blocks, creating a lot of movement with his center. And now you see him move to the pivot, which I actually thought he would be best at. And with the Broncos, you have Lloyd Cushenberry, who struggled a bit as a rookie. That second guard spot on the right side is still open as well, to go along with Dalton Reisner. So now I really believe you get your best 5 out there. And Minus has a lot of qualities that he brings to the table in terms of somebody who can uncurl those hips and create vertical push in the run game. And then as a pass protector, that ability to lock his hands inside the frame of rushers, force them to get around him, and then that willingness to jump on top of them when you land on the turf. Once again, a zone blocker primarily, and that really fits well with the plan that you can clearly see there. Plus, the second third-round pick, Baron Browning, the linebacker at Ohio State, somebody that I had quite a bit higher, and some of the people from the Draft Network, for example, they had him a lot higher. That was one of their brand guys, and I can see some of the things that he brings to the table in terms of really an all-around athlete. Played that Sam off-the-ball backer primarily at Ohio State, where he displays an impressive ability to take on blocks and really be a bear as a tackler, not let guys get away from him anymore, as well as in coverage, some very impressive ability to cover ground and flip his hips for such a big body. A lot of people looked at him as an edge rusher actually, which he did quite a bit of on passing downs for the Buckeyes, and he showed that ability to burst off the ball, ability to dip his shoulder and get around guys. Like, I think if they're looking at him as an outside linebacker, he could develop there and play some quality snaps for them. But it's really his versatility and his ability as an off-ball player primarily to do all those different things and bring that versatility to the table. Like, you watched the Penn State game last season, you have one snap where he's trailing Pat Frymouth across the field on a drag route, and a couple of snaps later, he gets the pressure on the quarterback, rushing off the edge. Like, I'm not totally sure what Denver is looking at him as, because they already have Chubb and Miller off the edges and don't really play their linebackers head up or even outside the offensive tackle in an off alignment, which is really that type of role that he played. But he gives you that flexibility where you can deploy him in different areas and he can make some impact plays. maybe limited to more passing down work as a rookie, but has ability to develop in a lot of different areas. And then we move on to day 3, and they go back to back here with safeties Caden Stearns and Jamar Johnson. Very different type of players, and I'm kind of discussing them one after the other here, with Stearns being more of your kind of freakish athlete when you look at the testing numbers. I thought would become a superstar when I first saw him as a freshman. The range at the size that he has, that ability to cover ground, take away angles in the run game, where he can be aggressive and still allow guys to get outside of him, whether it's from split safety alignments and he can race down and take away angles to the sideline, or as a single high free safety, his ability to work down and not allow the ball carrier to get a lot of yardage, but still be pretty consistent with his tackling. Like, there's a lot of things to like here, especially with that range that he displays as a center fielder, where you already have Justin Simmons, but now you can work in some two high safety looks and really almost use them in an interchangeable fashion. I do believe there's some inconsistencies as a deep defender at reading route patterns and quarterbacks being able to manipulate him to some degree, which he did make up with a lot of athleticism at times, as well as not being the type of guy that I want to trust in man coverage because he's kind of a gambler, I would say. But with that, you have Jamar Johnson, who you can move more into the slot, was primarily a nickel in 2019, a part-time player, and then developed this past season into a full-time starter, where his athletic testing is not nearly at the same level as Stearns, but as a player, that natural feel, ability to impact plays, those little details for the position, highly impressive. Like I said, you can play him in the slot where he's very aggressive, a good edge set in the run game, but even more so, his ability as somebody who you can't quite figure out where he's actually going to line up. I always have to go back to the Ohio State game, where he was really playing mind games with Justin Fields, in terms of in two high shells, acting like he was backing up, but then all of a sudden filling in the run game and making a tackle for minimal yardage, not tipping off the quarterback and coming on some blitzes where he was almost unblocked and made big plays that way, and then also got those 2 interceptions off field. Like, he's a very deceptive player, can line up deep in the slot, can really move around, plays physical, maybe not the greatest athlete, and not somebody that I would put as a single high free safety necessarily, but he has solid range, and it's his instincts that lead him to the ball consistently. So I think that pairing of Stearns and Johnson, very much different players, but as a duo kind of complement each other, I would say. Not necessarily saying that they're going to start with Kareem Jackson and Justin Simmons there, but you can work in different free safety looks and be very versatile with the things that you do in the back end. Then in the 6th round, Seth Williams, the Auburn wide receiver, somebody I'm not crazy about. There was a lot of hype for him last year, I thought, as this big body jump ball receiver. And this past season you saw he's not as strong or big as you think he is, especially that JC Horn matchup when he's going up against South Carolina. Him getting bullied for 3.5 quarters. And really, when you go through the tape, I actually watched like one game on him specifically, but he came up with so many corners that I watched in the SEC, and they were all batting away passes that you would look at as jump balls, to where that ability to win at the catch point and sky over defenders is somewhat nullified, especially now projecting going up against corners in the NFL. Don't think he's a great route runner necessarily, or gives you this dynamic threat after the catch. So really what you look at him as is somebody who can win in those contested catch situations, someone who can be a possession type of receivers and slant routes over the middle, and all this kind of stuff. Since you have a lot of those speedy inside receivers with KJ Hamler, Jerry Jeudy is more of your route runner. He's more your outside receiver. I think Tim Patrick at this point is still a free agent, so maybe they'll look into kind of replace him a little bit with Williams here, even though I think Patrick at this point is certainly a better receiver. You get back Cortland Sutton as well. This receiving room is deep, and Williams is another one of those guys who's gonna be on that depth chart pretty far down the road, but I believe in a certain role can give you some quality snaps. And I think here in the 6th round is much more easy for me to take than some of the hype he was receiving early. And then 3 7th round picks. First with Kerry Winston Jr., one of my favorite day 3 nickels. Winston is a former top 100 overall recruit who was a key contributor to the 2019 National Championship game winning LSU team. Had 4 interceptions and 9 more passes broken up that year before opting out this past season. He basically has no tape on the outside and should be a nickel only, but he did very well in coverage there, oftentimes playing way off, but still finding ways to disrupt the catches and having the gliding speed to allow receivers to separate vertically. He has those oily hips to flip without any issues against double releases, or receivers trying to cross his face on deeper developing routes, but also the short area quickness to avoid rubs and get back on top of his man. In zone coverage, he stays very balanced and shows good awareness for receivers around him, while dealing with a lot of balls coming his way, with a second round pick this past year, and probably a top 10 pick next year at those two corner spots. The negatives with Vincent, he is pretty late with actually coming out of his breaks a lot of times, which he will be punished more for in the pros, as well as being vulnerable to some push-offs down the field. But the biggest thing he has to improve upon is not giving as many half-hearted reps as a tackler, as he missed 8 attempts in 2019 alone. For the Broncos, with Bryce Callahan likely moving back into the slot like I already talked about this upcoming season, Vincent is probably limited to some sub-packages as a rookie, but I could see him take over that starting nickel a year from now maybe. Jonathan Cooper, the edge out of Ohio State, is another guy I certainly didn't expect to see last all the way until the 7th round. A really physical guy off the edge. Had some excellent production this past season as a pass rusher, which I think a lot of people haven't really caught on because the sack numbers may not look great, but in terms of the pressures, that ability to put offensive tackles on skates and then take advantage of that with some push-pull maneuvers or just swipe away the hands as they lean in. And to go with that as a run defender, really heavy hands, that ability to set the point of attack, drive tight ends backwards if they're matched up against him, or also offensive tackle, really stonewall them and hold his point. And to go with that, he plays with a great motor, constantly working the secondary and third moves as a pass rusher, as well as when he sees the ball carrier escape, turning around and chasing after him. Like, he's somebody in that rotation. You have Chubb, you have Miller. Malik Reed was filling in for Miller this past season. He started to kind of come into his own and develop into a rotational player for them. And I think Cooper's gonna slide right into that rotation where they are now 4 guys deep and can really stay fresh throughout games, because I think Cooper can give them some quality snaps on the edge, depending on what you want to do with Browning, who I already talked about earlier. Before finally, with pick 253, they selected Marquis Spencer, a 6'4", 300-pound defensive lineman who was primarily playing D-end in that 3-man front for the Bulldogs. Spencer's numbers improved every single season, with 8 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, a forced fumble, and an interception this past year. He has some pretty crazy athleticism for that size actually, where he's wrongly labeled as an edge, I would say, as more your 4 or 4 eye technique. I believe he's a developmental player with some position flexibility potentially. He does need to learn how to get off blocks more quickly, and I'm not totally sure he'll make that roster because they have plenty of guys there already, but he fits this 3-4 base pretty well, even if they do run more even fronts and sub packages. But to get another guy in there, in the rotation on base especially, I think he can be a nice step piece for them, either on the practice squad, being able to bring him up if somebody gets hurt, or actually making that roster and getting his playing time then. Like, I look at this draft class altogether, 10 names, I could easily see all 10 of them make that roster. We'll have to study it a little bit more, and that's what I'm doing right now, but I really liked what the Broncos did here. And with that, let's move on to the Kansas City Chiefs, who didn't have a first round pick because of the Orlando Brown trade, but they did have 2 selections in the second round, which 58th overall, they selected Nick Bolton, the linebacker out of Missouri, and 63rd overall, Creed Humphrey, the interior offensive lineman out of Oklahoma. In the 4th round, 144th overall, Joshua Kando, the edge rusher out of Florida State, and then 2 picks in the 5th round, Noah Gray, the tight end out of Duke, and 181st overall, Cornell Powell, the wide receiver out of Clemson, and then finally in the 6th round, 226th overall, Trey Smith, the interior offensive lineman out of Tennessee. So the Chiefs were first on the board at 58 overall, the pick that they acquired in the Orlando Brown trade in exchange for their first rounder, and they get Nick Bolton, who I had as my linebacker 8, I believe, about in this range. And if there was an area that the Chiefs needed to improve upon on defense, it was definitely that second level, where they just lacked those difference-making players. Anthony Hitchens has been a solid player for them, and they selected Willie Gay on day 2 last year, who you'd expect to make a jump in year 2, after not seeing the field a ton as a rookie. I think Bolton gives you a steady presence in the middle of that defense, very aggressive as a run defender, has the ability to chase things down to the sideline. To me, I always looked at him as somebody going forward and sideways. That's really his game. A lot of times on passing downs and covering the flats, where he's really good at taking on running backs after catching quick swing routes and stuff like that. The thing that I'm just not sure about with him is going backwards, actually covering ground in zone coverage, or taking up guys in man. I think you really want to use him as a pressure player on passing downs, where he's really good at sorting his way through protections and finding a seam for himself. And then when he arrives at the quarterback, he delivers some kill shots. Like I can think right now, last year against LSU and Alabama, there was at least one hit on the quarterback each that those guys should not have gotten up from. You can get him involved, put him on the edge to some degree, off the ball, getting on those looping or twisting blitzes. Like there's a lot of different ways that they can use him with some great closing bursts to get to the quarterback. And Steve Spagnuolo loves to blitz his linebackers on passing downs anyway. So if they just use him that way and not ask him to do too much in coverage, I think this pick definitely makes some sense. And then they come back 5 picks later with their original second round pick, and they steal my number 1 interior offensive lineman in this draft. Landon Dickerson would have probably been that guy, but with all the injuries that he's had, Humphrey was my number 1 choice, coming out of Oklahoma, where prior to this past season, he was looked at potentially as a first half of the first round type of pick. And now you get him with that second to last pick in the second round. Like that's tremendous value. 3-year starter for the Sooners, really good in the outside zone game, that ability to reach A-gap defenders, get his body across, and allow the ball carrier to get out to the edges. Maybe not the greatest power on those angular blocks to just open up big holes in the middle, but on more lateral schemes, that ability to just on the fly, work up to the second level, cut off linebackers, all those different things. I think is going to be a really good asset in that regard. And then in the pass game, you can really see that wrestling background that he has, being able to just get his hands inside the frame of rushers and adjust his base accordingly. Really strong anchor, not let them get up the middle and destroy the integrity of the pocket. Like you saw him down during the Senior Bowl week, he was almost impossible to get through. Actually stonewalled almost Levan Wusarike, who was only performing there for 1 day, and that was enough for him because he was pretty much beating up everybody other than Creed Humphrey. Like he was definitely holding his own, and I can't remember one clear rep that he definitely lost. So altogether, to get him here at the end of the second round, to me, an instant starter. You have Austin Blythe there from last year you brought back. I think he's going to move to the bench because you also brought in so many other guys, and I'm currently working in my head how exactly that front 5 will look like. But with the way I look at it, 3-year starter, really consistent player. I can't see him not being out there in the starting lineup week 1 almost. And then they weren't on the clock for another 81 picks when they brought in Joshua Kendo, the edge rusher of Florida State. Similar to his Seminole teammate Janaris Robinson from the opposite edge, Kendo presents some intriguing tools, and he has that lanky body type that Kansas City likes after they just lost Tano Passinio at 6'4", 260 pounds with an 82-inch wingspan. I personally don't nearly like Kendo as much as I liked Robinson, and he hasn't really been able to stay healthy for Florida State. But it's very much a Chiefs pick to where they'll play him as a base end and have him set the edge in the run game, although he'll have to prove himself on passing downs, where he still needs to learn to rush with a plan and improve his timing of his hand swipes. I certainly thought there were better edge rushers on the board when they were picking, and I looked at Kemba as more of a 5th or 6th round pick, although the type of player for Kansas City makes some sense. And then in the 5th round, Noah Gray, the Duke tight end. Pretty good athlete, running a 4.6 flat at his pro day. Gray's a natural route runner and receiver, but not much of an inline blocker, I would say, maybe more so as an H-back. I look at him in that role, or as a 6'4 slot receiver who can create some separation, but with only 31.5-inch arms and barely 9-inch hands, he doesn't give you much upside as a big-bodied pass catcher in terms of winning at the catch point in contested situations. You saw him do most of his work on underneath routes like digs and short outs, where he also shows some good hands, as he only dropped 3 passes on 107 catchable targets in his career. But I'm not sure if he gives you anything special for a tight end or wide receiver necessarily. As kind of a tweener prospect, I would say. Maybe the Chiefs just wanted somebody to work the underneath areas and draw some favorable matchups to complete that group of speedy receivers. And in the 5th round here, I can't hate on it too much, but I certainly like the other 5th round pick better. And Cornell Powell out of Clemson, the wide receiver, who I really thought was kind of a steal for them here as well, and will be just perfect for Kansas City. After they just lost Sammy Watkins, who was their de facto ex-receiver, I don't think the high end will be what Sammy Watkins had coming out of Clemson, who really was the number 1 wide receiver in that class, over some other really good guys. But Powell right now, when I look at those 2 players, and considering that Sammy just can't stay healthy, I think Powell will be a better player for them next year. Certainly bigger, and this guy plays big, whether it's off the line, getting off press, or down the field, winning at the catch point, wrestling the ball away from defenders. One of the best receivers in terms of the body control and ability to track the deep ball, as well as when he catches the ball, has some secondary burst, that ability almost like a wild horse to run with the ball and break tackles. Like, you add him to that receiving corp with all the speed that they have there, and now you have him crossing the field or break inside on a deeper developing route where the space cleared out for him, and the safety has to come down from depth. His ability to lower the shoulder and go through them, as well as hand out the stiff arm or get to the sideline. Like, I really think he's going to be a productive player for this Chiefs offense. As probably their starting X receiver in a more traditional West Coast offense, which Andy Reid in theory does run, so the tags make sense, even though the offense is much more versatile than that. Like, I would not be shocked if Powell at the end of the year has like 700-800 yards and close to double-digit touchdowns. And then finally, Trey Smith, the interior lineman out of Tennessee, my number 5 IOL. And I understand here, this has nothing to do with him as a player, or at least not for the most part, because Smith, there are definitely some medical concerns, having dealt with some blood clots in his lungs back in 2018, I believe it was, has been an all-SEC offensive lineman these last couple of years, but there's always that concern at the back of your mind, if that could be a reoccurring issue for him. I just can't speak on that, and so I can't just say he's a major steal without knowing his medical report. But if he's fine medically, let me tell you, this is gonna be a major steal. The power that he brings as a drive blocker, whether it's on combo blocks and moving guys 5 to 6 yards into the backfield, or singles when it's just on down blocks, and he has an angle on those guys, just opening up a huge lane on the inside for his running back. Not the most flexible necessarily, but can execute those cutoff or scoop blocks on the backside of zone run plays. And then the pass game can really stun rushers with those quick sets, and that ability as well to move pretty well naturally, as well as the strong anchor to where almost nobody can get through him. I think when you look at the majority of the losses that he did have as a pass protector, and you also saw it during Senior Bowl week, for example, where he's just way too aggressive, stepping into guys and not just short setting them, but actually trying to really step at them, shift way too much weight out in front and extending outside his frame, to where I just want to tell him, sit back there, nobody's running through your ass. So that is definitely something that can be cleaned up pretty easily. I think he brings a versatility. We've seen him successfully kick out the tackle, where his feet are good enough to be a starter in a pinch at least, but I really think at either one of those guard spots, probably not this year, but maybe a year from now, he could be a road grader for them in the run game, and if he just cleans up those little details in the pass game, it's going to be a Pro Bowl level guard. So for this class as a whole, I think Bolton was about at value, and it does feel a need. Then you get Humphrey, who was my number 1 interior offensive lineman, get him at the end of the second round, especially after 2 other centers go in that range before him. That is tremendous value. I didn't love those 2 guys in the middle there with Kendo and Noah Gray. Can fill certain roles, but I just don't see anything special there necessarily. But I did love their 2 late picks. In Cornell Powell, like I said, I think he's going to be a major contributor as a rookie already. And then Trey Smith, we'll have to see how exactly his situation goes going forward. But if he's totally healthy, I could see him becoming a Pro Bowl player on the inside for them, with that ability to kick out the tackle if they need him to. And that brings us to the Las Vegas Raiders, who went in the first round, 17th overall, Alex Leatherwood, the offensive tackle out of Alabama. Round 2, 43rd overall, Trevon Merrick, the safety out of TCU. Back-to-back picks in the 3rd round, 79th overall, Malcolm Coons, the edge out of Buffalo. And 80th overall, Divine Diablo, the safety / linebacker out of Virginia Tech. Then in the 4th round, 143rd overall, Tyree Gillespie, the safety out of Missouri. Round 5, 167th overall, Nate Hobbs, the cornerback out of Illinois. And then finally in the 7th round, 230th overall, Jim Morrissey, the interior offensive lineman out of Pittsburgh. Obviously, 17th overall, the Raiders once again make one of the shockers on day 1 by selecting Alex Leatherwood, who was projected to be a late first, early second primarily draft pick at the offensive tackle position, with some people actually looking at him to transition to guard. I thought he could play either one, even though I am still a little bit concerned about his foot speed on the outside. I certainly thought this was early for him as well. I didn't hate on it as much as some other people, but I personally had him as my number 43 or 44 overall player. Kind of took a step back in 2020, I thought, in terms of the pressures and sacks allowed, and he really showed some issues during Senior Bowl week. Although, to his credit, for him to even show up there and compete when a lot of people were way more fresh, had a couple of months, or in the case of some opt-out, even a year to prepare for it. While Alabama, I already talked about this with Deontay Brown, for example, the guy who played next to him at guard, who also had a rough week there. They were 2 weeks away from the national championship game and probably were not as fresh as those other guys. So I'm going to credit them for that. And I think Leatherwood brings a lot of qualities to the position. A very athletic offensive lineman, has that crazy flexibility to kind of torque his own body and get himself into a position for run blocks, to go with the power to widen the B gap. On the front side of those zone runs, you see a lot of big lanes opening up. At the same time, he can reach block edge defenders and get his ball carrier out to the edges. As a pass protector, has a strong anchor, has pretty good lateral agility as well. The issue, like I already talked about, the foot speed to match some of those really speedy rushers, where it looks almost lethargic at times, with guys going all out for the speed rush, and he barely hangs on, just being able to push them past the quarterback maybe. Like, it doesn't look like there's a lot of room for error, and because of that can have a little bit of issues in terms of the balance. He's gonna be their day one starter at the right tackle position, after they just traded Trent Brown back to New England, and I don't have as much of a problem with the player. I think Leatherwood, it was definitely early for him, but if he's going at the top of day 2, I don't have a problem with it. I thought they could have certainly traded back a few spots, acquire some extra picks, and still get that guy. But the main issue I have with the Raiders here, what exactly is your plan here? Like, you just gave up 3 of your starting offensive linemen from a year ago that, in fairness, could not really stay healthy all the time, but you didn't make any improvements at either one of those spots. And it's not like you're saving a boatload of cash necessarily. That was the biggest strength of this team, and now Leatherwood, he's gonna be a downgrade to whenever Trent Brown was healthy at least. You have a downgrade at center, that other guard spot that Rich Incognito is not filling in for. Like, I don't necessarily understand the plan here. But from that point on, Las Vegas really attacked the defense when they went in the second round. Trevon Merrick, the safety out of TCU, who was the number 1 safety on most people's boards. Personally, I had him as number 2 behind Richard Grant out of UCF. But I see a lot of the things that people get excited about with Merrick. The Horned Frogs played a lot of split safety looks, but then either rolled him into the deep middle or dropped him down to the slot, where I think he was the rangiest safety of the bunch. That ability to cover a lot of ground, be instinctive, read the eyes of the quarterback and let them get into the ball. That safety position and the role in the TCU defense is very demanding. Understanding things that you see pre-snap, reacting to motions and all those different things. So I think you're getting a smart player, a rangy player on the back end. Not necessarily the most physical safety in terms of just racing down the alley and getting involved in the run game, but has certainly improved as a tackler. Very good ball skills when it's up in the air to attack it, and has had very good production at TCU. I looked at him as an early round 2 prospect, so this is right in range for him, and I don't mind investing some resources. I think they gave up a 4th round pick to move up here and get that guy, especially with that safety situation. And they drafted 2 more actually, so I'm going to explain a little bit when I come to the end of this how I believe they will use those guys. But let's first talk about Malcolm Koonce here, the edge rusher of Buffalo, who I heard there was some noise about him going on day 2. Personally had him as more of a day 3 pick, although I understand the intrigue with him. As a run defender, keeps his hands busy, that ability to string plays out to the sideline and force the ball carrier back inside eventually. Has some limited experience also dropping back to some degree. And then as a pass rusher, really the pattern move for him is that sudden dip move where he's approaching the offensive tackle, and just when that guy tries to hit the punch on him, get that inside shoulder underneath and go around the guy. I think you can define him as a little bit of a slow burn pass rush, where he's not always coming off the ball with a lot of urgency, kind of reading the passes of offensive tackles, and he's good at doing that and countering what they are doing, but I'd like to see him a little bit more in attack mode. I look at him as a Leo in a Seattle type of defense, which I think Gus Bradley, the new defensive coordinator, he's going to be more versatile on the back end, but in terms of the front, still more that Seattle-based terminology at least. That's why it's a little bit surprising to me, because they have Yannick Ngakoue there, just brought him in free agency, who was that type of guy in Jacksonville, in that type of front. So Koonce is going to be a primary backup. You can get him out there on some passing downs, because they desperately need some help off the edge as well. with Max Crosby being really the only consistent contributor, I just don't know if Coons is going to be a real impact player from day one. And then with the pick right after that, Divine Diablo, the safety slash linebacker out of Virginia Tech, I believe he's a very interesting prospect because you look at him like 220 pounds, almost looks like Cam Chancellor in that Hokie uniform. For that size, has tremendous range. You saw him as a deep safety a lot of times, where he rarely let guys get behind him. But I even like him more dropping down, covering tight ends in man coverage, and as the +1 in the box, your prototypical strong safety. And like I said, I think the Raiders under Gus Bradley are going to be more multiple in the back end, with the next pick here as well, who I'll get to in a second, where Diablo's not going to be maybe in that type of prototypical role that you would see, like a Cam Chancellor, for example, but more your tight end eraser, maybe some dime linebacker, since they were kind of underwhelmed with what they had from the linebacker position last year, especially in passing downs. Diablo, not the most instinctive playmaker in coverage necessarily, but very fluid for such a big guy, and I think he's going to have a certain role in that defense where he can make an impact, especially maybe matching up against Travis Kelce for once, as they have anybody who can cover that guy. And that plays in hand with the next pick here in Tyree Gillespie, the Missouri safety, who is more of your typical free safety, single high guy, where he was a 3-year starter at Missouri, I believe, and played like one of the best guys in the SEC at that spot, showing excellent range on the back end, that ability to take away angles from depth, take away vertical shots, challenge receiver when the ball is in the air. You go back, just watch the Alabama game, that versatility that he brings to the table, where on one snap he's racing down on Devontae Smith on a slant route from like 15 yards deep and dislodges the receiver from the ball. Then a couple of snaps later you have Jalen Waddle on a speed sweep, and he's coming from that single high alignment and stops it for like 2 yards, I believe, as he's chasing him down at the sideline. And then later in the game in a goal line situation, him making a solo tackle on Najee Harris short of the goal line. Like, he's just a really good football player, and he tested better than most people expected. The elephant in the room with him didn't have a single career interception, which is kind of crazy considering how long he has been playing there on the back end. But he plays the position safely, I would say, so not allowing a lot of big chunk plays for the offense. And he's going to have to turn himself into more of a playmaker, I believe, being more reactionary, more anticipatory. But I believe with him and Merrick, with the safety they had there, the guys that are still left are going to be backups, I believe. Like Jonathan Abram has not shown anything to earn that starting gig. And I really believe Merrick and Gillespie are going to be the two starting safeties there, where they can use them in interchangeable roles. Both have that range, that ability to come from depth and erase angles. And then, like I said, Diablo, more of your tight end eraser, dime linebacker maybe. But either way, I like that trio a lot better than what they had last year. And then in the 5th round, they get Nate Hobbs, the cornerback out of Illinois. I didn't really get to watch him before the draft, but it seems fairly early for me, and probably was a little overdrafted due to the athletic testing. When I look at some of the other corners that went in that range, he was a 4-year starter at Illinois, and he did deflect 14 passes and intercept 2 more over his final 2 seasons under Lovie Smith there, which was like 18 games, I believe. But I would not say he was super technically sound or disciplined in coverage at this point. I can't speak much more about him, unfortunately, since I only got to watch 1 game and was able to read up on some of the stuff about him, but that definitely seemed a little early to me. However, I do have some things to say about the Raiders' final pick here, and Jim Morrissey, the interior offensive lineman out of Pittsburgh, 47 career starts, with all but one of them at center. I like his lateral movement in the zone run game and ability to work up to the second level while adjusting on the fly, as well as pulling out to the edges and hitting his targets in the screen game. In pass pro, he does a nice job of helping out his guards in slide protection, and he has a firm grip on guys rushing over him usually. He was also responsible for all the checks along the Pitt offensive line. The thing is, he doesn't have great power to actually drive guys off the ball, and his average athleticism can be taken advantage of by more physically gifted pass rushers. The Raiders seem to really like Andre James, since they moved on from Rodney Hudson this offseason, and they also brought in Nick Martin for agency, who I think has starting upside. So Morrissey may start in the practice squad, but if a team has an injury at that position, I believe they'd be wise to steal him from there. So for the Raiders draft class as a whole, Leatherwood obviously was a little early, and so was Coons in my opinion, but I like that trio of safety if they have a plan of actually using those guys correctly. Hobbs, I just didn't get to watch a lot of, so I'm not going to say too much about him, but I like Morrissey in the 7th round. I probably would look at him as a center prospect primarily, so I'm not totally sure how he's going to get to playing time for this team. So there were some questionable decisions, nothing backbreaking like we've seen in recent years, but this team has certainly been going by the beat of their own drum, and we'll see if it works out. I'm not sure how much better exactly they have gotten this offseason, which is going to be a tough thing in that division where everybody else seemed to improve. And that brings us to a final team here, the Los Angeles Chargers, who went 1st round, 13th overall, Rashawn Slater, the offensive tackle out of Northwestern. 2nd round, 47th overall, Asante Samuel Jr., the cornerback out of Florida State. 3rd round, 77th overall, Josh Palmer, the wide receiver out of Tennessee. And another pick in the 3rd round, 97th overall, Trey McKitty, the tight end out of Georgia. In the 4th round, 118th overall, Chris Rumph, edge rusher / linebacker out of Duke. 5th round, 159th overall, Brendan Hymas, the offensive tackle out of Nebraska. 2 6th round picks, 185th overall, Nick Niemann, the linebacker out of Iowa. And 198th overall, Larry Roundtree III, running back out of Missouri. And then finally in the 7th round, 241st overall, Mark Webb, the safety out of Georgia. So when I was doing my mock drafts, I consistently had the Chargers ending up with Christian Darrisaw, the offensive tackle out of Virginia Tech, my OT3, and he would not have been a bad consolation prize, but instead they get the number 2 offensive tackle, the 7th overall prospect on my board, Rashawn Slater. Like, that is tremendous value off the bat here. He's just already such a technically sound offensive lineman, whether it's widening the edge on the front side of zone run plays, the power that he brings there, really exploding out of his stance, or scooping up free techniques on the backside. But I actually like him best, his ability to work up to the 2nd level, the angles that he takes, and how he just bullies linebackers out there. You watch the 2019 Ohio State game, the way he was shoving those guys around, it was highly impressive. And that was also the game that he's mostly known for, in shutting down Chase Young. And to be clear here, he wasn't matched up against Young from the start. There were some snaps against the right tackle, but when those two went at it, Slater definitely won the battle in terms of in the run game, making him almost quit at times where Young didn't show a ton of resistance, and in the pass game, just not being able to get any pressures all day long. Slater's just really technically sound, has a good jump out of his stance to make up that depth, and he doesn't have great length, but he knows how to make up for it with swiping down the hands of rushers and just really being on point with his hand placement. Like, he has the potential to be a Pro Bowl offensive tackle from year 1. And when you look at who the Chargers had starting at left tackle with Sam Tevy and some of those other names, this is gonna be a huge upgrade for them. And then in the 2nd round, they get a perfect scheme fit here in Asante Samuel Jr., the cornerback out of Florida State, the son of former All-Pro Asante Samuel, who played for the Eagles and the Patriots obviously. And his son comes very much in that same mold, that playmaking ability from the cornerback position, with Brandon Staley coming in, very much like I talked about with Kyle Fuller for the Broncos, the role that he's going to play as the field side off-zone corner. I just think Samuel, in that type of role, he was a step ahead of everybody in this cornerback class. In off coverage, that click and close ability, making plays on the ball, just trusting what he sees and driving on routes. Like, he's going to be a playmaker in this defense, and I already have a small wage on him winning Defensive Rookie of the Year, just because of how perfect he's going to be for that defense, which plays a lot of too high safeties and rotates them up and down. The issues for Samuel here, just at that size, only like 5'10 and a half, 5'11 maybe, and barely measuring at 30 inches in terms of his arms. Like, he's going to have some issues against those big-bodied wideouts at the catch point, especially in the red zone, I believe. And those guys can also kind of bully him in terms of the run game. But I really believe that he's going to make a lot of big plays for this defense and will be one of the front runners for Defensive Rookie of the Year. And then we move on to the 3rd round, Josh Palmer, the Tennessee wide receiver, somebody who was one of my favorites personally. I thought this range was perfect for him. Actually thought he was gonna go a little bit later maybe, because he never quite recorded 500 receiving yards in any season with the Volunteers, and doesn't have those elite measurements or speed necessarily, but he's a really solidly built wideout who has some surprising ability to separate vertically, stack his corner, and win down the field, to go with really good tracking of the ball. And when it's in tight quarters, his ability to elevate and attack the ball at its highest point is very impressive. He was one of the 2 guys who actually beat Patrick Surtain from Alabama for a touchdown this past season. Had one of the best Senior Bowl weeks out there, where you really saw some of the technical things with him in terms of selling routes and keeping defenders on their heels. I remember one route specifically where he was running a shallow crosser against off coverage, so that should be an automatic win in one-on-ones. But he kept the DB backing up because of the way that he was selling vertically with his shoulders while his lower body was already starting to make the turn. That just shows me some savvy there. And he's a really good block on top of that as well. Not sure if he has that breakaway gear after the catch to just run away from defenders or being super creative in the open field, but as that true wideout, somebody that you can rely upon in jump ball situations, and as a route runner who's going to consistently be where he's supposed to be. Like, I really like Palmer personally. And then Trey McKitty, the tight end out of Georgia, he's another guy who never produced at the level that you would want to see from a day 2 tight end, especially this past season at Georgia. I think he only caught 12 passes while missing a couple of games. And he really made a major transition from his time at Florida State, where he was more your big slot receiver, and then his past season added some weight, added some power, really developed more into an inline tight end, somebody that in the run game can create that momentum on defensive ends, execute a lot of different blocks, and be more of your in-the-box contributor while still having some of those skills as a receiver. Like, I have to refer back here again to the Senior Bowl, where he goes out and all of a sudden you're thinking, who's this guy catching passes out there? He's a natural route runner, a natural catcher of the ball, may not be somebody with that dynamic ability off the snap to really threaten defenders, but he's going to work his way open. And that's pretty much what he did all week long. So you combine that with what we saw that improved really as a blocker at the end of the line of scrimmage. Like, I really think he's going to be one of the more complete tight end prospects coming out of this draft. I think this is about the range where he should have gone. Had him as a very early day 3 prospect personally. I don't think he's going to replace what Hunter Henry did for this team last year, who's just more of a dynamic receiving option. The Chargers signed Jared Cook earlier this offseason in free agency as more of a designated pass catcher, although he's certainly starting to slow down. So I think McKitty has a chance to take on a chunk of that work, depending on how quickly he can pick up that Joel Lombardi offense. And I think he'll be on the field quite a bit, even if it's just for pass protection purposes, which I thought he was very good at already when he was at Georgia. And then I like a lot of these picks that they made on day 3. First with Chris Rumph in the 4th, probably my least favorite one of the bunch here. And he's a very interesting player because at that size, he's like 225, 230 pounds. He's not going to be playing on the edge full time. And I don't think he quite has the frame to bulk up to really an outside linebacker or defensive end even. But what I do like with him, that versatility in passing downs. Watch the Notre Dame game where he's basically never with his hand in the dirt, never actually truly lines up on the edge, but just as an off-ball blitzer from all different kinds of angles and positions, creating issues for the offense where they don't really know where he's coming from and where he's going. Like, I believe you have to have a very specific plan for him, because I don't think he's going to be out there on a lot of base downs, not really the type of guy who can set the edge and force the ball carrier to cut inside, but somebody who can drop back, take away those shallow areas in zone coverage, and just be that versatile piece as a blitzer here in the 4th round, maybe a little bit early. But if you have the right role for him, if you deploy him in that way, I think he can make some impact plays for you. And then Brandon Jaimes in the 5th, the Nebraska offensive tackle, somebody who I got to late in the process, but I really enjoyed his tape just because he's so technically sound, the way he understands angles, his football smarts. May not bring a ton of power in the run game, but always is in the right position, whether it's on the front side locking out the end or working up to the second level and cutting off linebackers. And then as a pass protector, establishing the proper position with the edge rusher, make the rushers really work for what they want to get. There are obviously limitations with him just measuring in at 300 pounds and not even having 33-inch arms, which is kind of the benchmark for an offensive tackle that you have to have. But I think with technique, he can make up for some of those measurement and athleticism traits that he may be missing. So to have him as your 3rd offensive tackle, somebody that can take on some snaps when one of your starters goes down, I believe getting him in the 5th round here, that's some good value. And so is Nick Niemann here in the 6th, the linebacker out of Iowa. He has a lot of those things that you see from a typical Iowa linebacker in terms of coming from a football family, being a great tackler, and being a senior captain. But then he gets to his pro day and he runs sub 4.5, has over a 10-inch broad jump and a 6.67 free count drill, which are all elite numbers for the position. What he's actually not great at, unlike a lot of the Iowa linebackers, is inside the box, reading his keys and deconstructing blocks from offensive linemen working up to him. But he has the lateral mobility to track ball carriers from the backside and then hit another gear when he has an angle on them, as well as shutting down stuff going towards the sideline and having a certain flexibility to kind of bend around blockers. In the pass game, Neiman displays good awareness in zone coverage and reroutes receivers coming into his area, but he was also asked to play man against tight ends detached from the line and showed the ability to stick with those guys in shallow crosses. The issue is his production in the pass game was very limited, as he only had 1 career pass defensed and 2 sacks, so you kind of have to see, can he be a playmaker as well on that second level? And the Chargers already have 3 guys with legitimate range on that second level of the defense, but I think another guy who's going to contribute on special teams, and when you put them out there, he's not going to look lost, especially on passing downs. With the second 6th round pick, they selected Larry Roundtree, the running back out of Missouri, who I think is a very solid player. Nothing that really excites you, but the attitude that he runs with, the contact balance, the power to gain yards through contact. I think there's a lot of things to like here, and I actually look at him as a direct replacement of Kalen Ballage, who did get some playing time there late in the year, as that number 3 running back, behind Austin Eckler obviously, who hopefully can stay healthy this season, and then Joshua Kelly, who they drafted in the middle rounds last year. Roundtree is more of your inside hammer, somebody that really wants to get vertical, in short yardage situation, who can get what's needed, as well as to close out game, his physical style of running, rather improvement as a receiver I would say, and he's not going to give you that secondary burst once he's in the open, but as an RB3 to get him here in the 6th round, you could definitely do worse. And then finally Mark Webb, the safety out of Georgia, another guy who I just can't shake the picture of what I saw during Senior Bowl week, where he got roasted pretty badly on a consistent basis. He does have good size, but the quickness and speed for man coverage to me aren't there. He's a former wide receiver recruit and still developing a feel for the position, so he'll have to earn a roster spot via special teams, where I expect him to contribute, but nothing that I saw that really gets me excited about him. However, for the class as a whole, Slater at the top, a Pro Bowl level left tackle, then a perfect fit, Samuel in the 2nd round, who could be, like I said, a defensive rookie of the year candidate at the cornerback position. Then you get a dependable outside receiver in Josh Palmer, Trey McKitty could be a starting tight end, some depth pieces, some people are going to be out there in specific packages. I think the Chargers put together an excellent draft class here. Look at this, and now let's compare draft classes in the AFC West against each other, where at number 1 I went with the Denver Broncos. Not sure if I loved them trading up for a running back in the 2nd round, but I definitely love Javonte Williams as a player. Patrick Surtain is going to be a great fit for that system and allows everybody else to move in their more natural spots, I believe. I like them trading back in the middle rounds, pick up a couple of really good safety prospects who can kind of fill different roles. Baron Browning at the end of day 2 to me is a steal there as well, just because of the athletic upside that he presents. Quinn Miners could be a starting right guard, and then you get a lot of guys who are going to be in the rotation, at the defensive line especially. I just think this draft class, if they are fine with Drew Lock at the quarterback position, if he can develop in year 3, with all the receivers around him, a really good draft class that they already had last year, this roster and team overall is better than most people think it is. And the close second here, the Los Angeles Chargers, just talked about them, how they found some great fits for them, with Slater at the top and Asante Samuel, who I believe are going to be 2 of the best rookies out there. You get a consistent number 3 receiver, maybe a starting tight end, and some guys in the later rounds that can serve as depth pieces, but also be used in specific packages. And I really believe there's a separation to the next team, which is the Kansas City Chiefs. And I talked actually about the final pick, Trey Smith. I believe he could be the steal of the draft if he's going to be fine medically. Since we don't know that right now, I can't give them full credit for it. And I thought a couple of the mid-round picks I wasn't too high on. But I think if they use Nick Bolton as his pressure play on 3rd downs, have a specific role for him. You have Creed Humphrey, who's going to be a starting center, I believe. Cornell Powell, I talked about him, how he could really be one of the high-producing receivers on this unit. There's some positive things about this draft class. Not sure if I love the way that they handled the whole thing. And then the Raiders at number 4. Like, I'm not going to be too dramatic about Leatherwood in the first round, like some other people are, but that was definitely a reach. One of the third round picks I didn't love. I definitely like that trio of safeties that they picked up, if they use them appropriately. But I'm just not a huge fan of how exactly they've been handling things these last 3 years in the draft, and I'm not alone in that. So it's really 1 and 2 are very close together, then it's a clear third, and the Raiders are pretty clearly number 4 in my opinion. And that's gonna do it. That's our draft breakdown series, where we've now talked about all 32 teams and every single pick that was made. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with anything I said, or have something to add on top of it. I have plenty of things planned for this offseason, but I'm also always open to ideas. You have 7 more videos to get through if you want to hear all my opinions on every single team. And if you want to get into contact with me, or just stay up to date with all the content that I post, make sure to follow me on social media. Links for that are down below in the description, as well as on the screen here right now. And I'll be back next week with a write-up on my page about the most improved position groups during this 2021 offseason. So until then, see you later. Peace!